Coming at you here from my studio in Woodland Hills, California. For those who don't know about me, I'm a longtime educator, teaching now for 42 years. Some of the students that I've had through the years, and I get to hear of all these different modes, Mark Shulman, Glenn Sobel, Jake Slicker from Semisonic, Ozo Motley's drummer Jiro Yamaguchi, Daniel Glass, and many others. I was a longtime student of Freddy Gruber, so I was on the innermost circle of Freddy's world, as well as a student of Vinny Chapin, and I have more stories than Freddy Gruber has stories for that. So long. I will be doing a clinic or a master class along with Gilbert, the ultimate guide to syncopation, whereby I can read syncopation and tore it apart, and I will give you some unique insights and valuable assets for creating a flow, as well as some great phrasing ideas, and of course, classic independence. This event is on August 12th, 10 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Central. This will be streamed live through the Valley Percussion Festival Facebook page. So check that out. I will be going through my recent books, and no clinic with me or masterclass would be complete if I didn't go through a little bit of some technical exploits. So I'll be talking about some of the techniques and how I break that down as well. So I would hope you will all join me with Gilbert Garcia. This again will be streamed live through Valley Percussion Festival Facebook page, August 12th, 10 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and who the heck knows what time in Central Europe. Actually, it will be 1900 hours like that. So hope to see you there. Bruce Becker again. Join me.
Hello guys, I hope all of you are having a great Saturday evening, right? Saturday afternoon, just past the morning. Super excited about today's stream. We have a master, world-class educator with us. But before we go into it, we would like to just remind you to follow, like, share our page. We also have Instagram, Valley Percussion Festival in Instagram, Valley Percussion Festival in Facebook, and on YouTube it's the G-Drums, G-D-R-U-M-Z. That's the channel for YouTube. The gentleman that's about to go on today, guys, needs very that's actually no introduction. He's taught some of the world-class performers that are leading the educational and performance in drumming today in the world-class scenario. And he's about to share some of his techniques and concepts that he has shared with them and that he has put in his new book. And I'm blabbing on too much. Of the hour. Here he is. Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Good, man. We got your music going on. You might want to slide down.
Excuse me?
You got the music still running on the background. Some music? There we go. I don't know if you can pod down all the way down. There we go. How are you, Gilbert?
I am doing great, sir. I am doing great. How about yourself?
Nice. I'm doing all right, man. You know, morning time in Southern California. Not too early for me because I have 2 little kids, so I'm up awfully early in the morning every day.
Yes.
I'm getting up about 6 or 6:30 and hustle those dudes through breakfast, getting them to school and all that stuff. In fact, the real school year starts on Monday. So
yes.
We had our summer YMCA/summer school thing.
Yeah.
And now we're getting into the nitty gritty of a new school year. So.
New school year.
Yeah.
A lot of excitement in the moment. We start school on Monday as well with students.
Okay.
So yeah,
I have a
Yeah.
student in Dallas who he said his grandkids started last Thursday, and he was like texting me like, Thursday? What kind of day is it Thursday to start school?
Yeah.
It's kind of peculiar, but
Yes.
what it is,
Yes.
man.
Yes, it is. It is what it is. Um, well, sir, super stoked about what you're gonna share with us today, about your new book. Um, if we can, before you actually start sharing with us, what prompted you to write this book?
Oh, 3 years going back to, I mean, even my first teacher, I had a copy of Ted Reed's Syncopation. And when I went through it in the late 70s, I was a longtime student of Freddy Gruber. So I hung with Freddy pretty steadily from like, it was either the end of 77 or beginning of 78, around that period, still about 84. And I'd gone on the road, but whenever I had a break, because when I was on the road, I was basically just a few hours north of LA, and I'd usually come into town with the guitar player. We'd leave after the gig on a Sunday night and get home at like 4 a.m. here in LA.
Yeah.
And we'd, have that day and the next day, and then we would drive back up like that Tuesday kind of mid-afternoon to get to our gig, because we were doing a 6-nighter up there.
Yeah.
So Ted Reed was my go-to for, and commonly so for a lot of people, because of the Alan Dawson influence of using it for, playing independence against the jazz rides and pattern. And so I definitely went through those exploits. I put my spin on those. But as a book, and as I gotten more deep into teaching, I was always looking for stuff to find just enough stuff, like a hefty amount of stuff that I could go through. And I would always go back to Ted Reed and I would just reinterpret it. And it just became more of a thing, rather than having people buy this book for just only using a few pages, or this book. And so during the pandemic, I really, was thinking about a book already. And I have a former student now who's become, I think it's his fourth book. He's putting out a book currently with Hudson, and it's called Phillyisms. And it's all about Philly JoJo. He had put for Philly Joe Jones. He had put out a book previous to that, Haynesisms, and that was Roy Haynes. He has a book called Groove Systems. His name is Tim Carmen, really good dude, studied with me for a couple years. And I got involved with Tim because I had one idea for a book, and then it kind of morphed over, and I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to take all my systems of Ted Reed and, etch them out. And so whereby I don't have a program, and I'm not into learning a program, not that I'm anti-program. I had one years ago, but I don't have the time, and I handwrite everything for my students anyways. So I told Tim, I said, it may be a little bit of a slow process, but I'll write some stuff out. Maybe I'll share some videos with you, and we'll just collaborate back and forth. And my reason for getting involved with him is he had a great way of laying things out, because he's written some current books. He's also a social media guy for Hudson. I thought it was the perfect collaboration.
Yeah.
So we're actually talking about another book right now. We just,
wow.
I just sort of laid a conversation with him a week ago, and I have a video that I just put together that I'm going to send him later today of just my ideas and thoughts. And it'll be a thin book. I don't want to get long-winded with a book, because you can go, all over the place. In fact, with the Syncopation, or my version of it, the Ultimate Guide to Syncopation, on the finishing touch, it's like, I could have done this, or I could have done this. I could have, and at some point you have to stop. Yeah. I think I gave enough different insights to pique people's imagination. And in the forward, I think I put your presence is not only required, but requested and required, and to add to the mix. These are not by any stretch of the imagination the only things you can do with Ted Reed. I have dozens of other things that I've done. But like I said, I wanted to lay out a nice format. And I use different sections. Most people get caught up, as in the case of Stick Control, where people use page 5, 6, and 7 only. In Syncopation, they'll go to the syncopated pages of the newer printing 34 to 45, the older printing 33 to 44. And for me, I started to bounce around the book and see some value of things that I could put together that would, for example, give me some really substantive exercises for building roles.
Yeah.
And when I do the role studies, and in anything, I would say, I always kind of want to slow it down and open up the motion so that you're crystal clear and your ability to track what you're doing in your movement is synchronized with what you're doing.
Yes.
A lot of times people play a little faster than their brain can process and they fall off the rails. And it's human nature to want to do something and start here and then all of a sudden want to like burn to that faster rate of speed. And 9 times out of 10, it falters. And even with that short example there, I just want to step back because I'm thinking about it, is if I was playing a paradiddle as I just did to increase speed, I wouldn't just speed it up. I would change rhythmic elements. I would go and do like a gear shifting and do a pyramid, so to speak. Play it in 8th notes, play it in 8th notes triplets, play it in 16th notes, play it in 16th note triplets, whatever that tempo would allow for, and get control over it. And don't just do like a full throttle, like you're stepping on the gas and trying to go from 0 to 60.
Yes.
You might crash. So
Yes.
For me, but going back to the role ideas, I set up, pages earlier in TED Read Syncopation. As I recall, I started with, I think, pages 14 and 15. And those are basically triplets and quarter notes. The idea was to take the triplet and make them all double strokes. So they become essentially 16th note triplets, but really put together a certain kind of a choreography. And I was, taking back to what I had done with Freddy and how he would build up roles and stuff like that. And he, in looking back, there was a lot of vagueness in some cases with Freddy. He was not a great orator. He had ideas and he could get them out somehow and elbow you and hit you. And I worked really hard to dissect a lot of what he was talking about. Now, fortunately for me, I was able to hang with him a lot longer than my studies.
Yeah.
Still around 1999. We hung fairly closely. I was a guy that was on his innermost circle of hangs. And he came over to Europe when I lived over there a few times. We traveled together. We did the Frankfurt Music Fair. We did the Koblenz Drum Festival. So, I could sit with him and get him kind of calm down and engage in some pretty deep conversations as to what was that again, or maybe carry on a new conversation. And it added a lot of clarity. The other thing that I would just say, just in terms of my head and how it worked, was when I was studying, he didn't write notes. He wrote notes down in the music, like in the books, like do this, and had these little things to work on and start here, do this, and then go to page 92 or whatever. And it jumped all around. And I had one of those heads that was fairly clear and I could compartmentalize. So like every exercise we did, I was able to categorize and put on a shelf, not to forget where I put it, but to be able to access it.
Yeah.
And later on, when I'd moved to Europe, I was able to systematically go through things that I wanted to readdress, because actually there's a little backstory to that. I was going to be taking over a position at a school in Vienna as the head of the drum department.
Okay.
Which I did. I did that for a year. And when I was planning to go down there, or when it was scheduled, I wanted to go through certain things. And so, like, for example, I studied with Freddy traditional grip for about 6 or 8 months. And then I looked at him and I said, I'm not going to play traditional grip. I'm a rock guy, working on my jazz stuff. And he looked at me with a frowned brow. Okay, But as I said, with my compartmentalization, I remembered a great deal of all the exercises. So while I don't play this grip and have far less of the touch and the sensitivity that I have in my match grip, the remaining mechanics and how it works, absolutely solid. So I was practicing that, and I was looking back at other things, and it really, got me into a space of preparing for that teaching gig, which is really intense. I look back to that, and I've said this many times before, that 1 year with being the head of the department and having about 30 or 32 students from various backgrounds. You had guys from Hungary, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy. I had a couple of guys from Greece.
That's a melting pot.
Yeah, some Finnish guys. I mean, it was pretty intense. And because it was a private school patterned after Musicians Institute, you paid money. You know, in Europe, they don't pay for money for education. So a lot of guys worked really hard. I remember talking to the one Greek guy that was studying with me, and he said he drove a truck to save up so he could go to this school. And it was intense, man. So I say that that 1 year was worth about 7 years of teaching, because I was cutting and figuring out, and I didn't want to do anything that was less than what I really thought was appropriate. You know, my integrity was very high. I really tried to reach high. I was very fortunate to bond and hang a couple of times with Jojo Mayer, because he was brought in as a resident twice. And my recollection, pretty spot on. We bonded right away. I got him, he got me, we hung. I actually hooked him up with Freddy later on. But he'd noticed the difference, because he'd been coming there. He was already a phenom in Europe. He was a Sonar, Peisty, Agner stick guy. While he was living in New York, working it out there, he would come back to Europe and do, you know, drum festivals and Frankfurt stuff and events that Sonar or Peisty would put on his behalf. And he said to me, he goes, man, you really made some changes around here. You know, like he was very impressed. Like he could see the level of what I was trying to put into it. Now I say, you know, I was a younger guy, so I had some of the goods. I just did not have all the clarity or narrative. And actually another thing that I would speak about that very strongly is that when you're teaching people from another country who are not native English speakers, your ability to communicate is utmost importance. You have to speak slowly. You have to choose your words carefully. You might even go to, like when I would go to Germany, because I hung there for so long, or Austria, or even Italy, or various spots where they have a sort of a direct translation when they speak English, that if we were listening to them speak, we're like, that's not how you say that. That's all backwards. I wouldn't correct. I would listen. And I would speak like that purposely so that they were really in line with what I was speaking about. I became almost like a spectrum dude, like just narrating a picture. And I could say that because my kid's a spectrum kid, so I understand that mindset. So he's a 7-year-old little guy who's like super smart now. And his brain works a little bit different, but he's on the upward ladder, like kicking ass. Anyway, those kinds of things really put forward, you know, sensible teaching and how to put things together. And again, I was probably really involved in using Ted Reed. Well, I know I was, you know. So that was like another go-to.
Yes.
And so going back to my now current teaching, you know, I had different books I would look from, and there's all sorts of great literature that I would definitely use for snare drum literature, but for the roll. So let me just sort of break something down. I'm going to play just how I would break down the triplet roll. Now, I'm going to do it in German. I wouldn't do it in French, but everybody would be in my fold, would be starting in French grip to get the natural swing of the stick together, to feel the placement of the stick in the last joint of the index finger with the thumbprint on top and the elbow out, and all those attributes, and the fingers not cradling or folding, but staying open to support the stick. If you're talking about the molar method, it's included in the French grip, because the molar method for me is nothing more than a locomotive action, right? It's just your forearm kind of helping to propel the stick. And if you have a good sense of placement of that stick, and you have the stick balanced in your hand, and you understand the weight value, you can get that thing to work very nicely. Your role is to grab the energy of that stick and redirect it, you know, no matter what it is. If it gets a meager bounce on a floor tom, you're there to redirect and take that energy and cast it around the drum set for a good solid performance of that stick movement. So that being said, I wouldn't do these things in French. I would do them in German. And so a couple things, double strokes. What do we have? Well, you have a downstroke double. You have an upstroke double. You have two variables of what I would call a tap stroke double. One where you could basically bounce and come back to reset, or one that would just fall and catch. So I could call that a bounce catch, right? I'm just dropping it. Notice how my fingers are really responsive to the movement of the stick. So we want to hyper sensitize our fingers to be super engaged with the body of the stick. They're not slipping and sliding. You want to be able to use all the digits and not cast the pinky finger out of the group or Get that index finger to sit flat or close down and press here. You want to have a nice, well-crafted shaped hand. You can always break the rules. Those rules are, when I say when you break them, are more about posture, gesture, and attitude, expression. And that doesn't have to be pretty and perfect in a technical world, but you don't want to corrupt your technique. So you always want to sit back home and work on those fundamentals so they become deeply rooted in what you do. And they'll carry you forward if you're doing the right things. So going back to what I was talking about, the rules, you've got a downstroke double, you got an upstroke double, and you've got a tap stroke double. So if I take the triplets, I'm just going to play a whole bunch of triplets. And I'm going to play, my first one would be what I would label as a pivot and a catch. My second would be a drop and a pull, or a up. I could say to up. I would take the word up, splitting it into 2 syllables, and lift on really the second stroke when I'm playing slower. Playing faster, it's going to start to bleed into a lead-in move to my upstroke. And then I'll play a tap stroke double. So I could have down, up double, pivot, catch, up. Whoops, let me say that again. Pivot, catch, drop, pull double, pivot, catch, drop, pull double, pivot, catch, drop, pull double, pivot, catch, drop, pull double. Now, all that lift and drop is essentially the inner workings of the starting points of Moeller, your downstrokes and your upstroke values. And so the downstroke would be a challenge so that you don't overstimulate the note on the down and try to get a nice drop so that your strokes are even in terms of dynamics, not but. So if I take, for example, I got to look at my book. Hang on a second. Here it is, by the way, Ultimate Guide to Syncopation. And I'm going to go to one of the early pages that I would use for pages 16 and 17. These would be combinations of eighth notes and eighth note triplets, whereby the eighth notes would stay intact, but the eighth note triplets would be converted or interpreted to double strokes. And I'll just take, which would be number 12 on page 17 in the newer printing of Ted Reed. Well, the newer printing's been sort of in print for quite some time, but I'm sure there's a lot of guys who might be sitting out there who have the older printing. So then it would be still page 16, I believe. And I'm pretty sure page 12 or number 12 might be, I'm not sure, but whatever. So in my book, it's on page 6. Here's my interpretation. So I'm going to take my rule, and my concept for this is to come down on the numbers and play them super slow. Get nice elasticity out of your double strokes. Feel a nice lift and drop to access the downstroke on the numbers. So this one is, if we look at the original notation, it'll be 1 and Lee 2 and 3 and Lee 4 and. But with our interpretation of the eighth note triplets, it's going to be 16th note triplets. I could count them in that vein as well. And it would be 1 E and E 2 and 3 E and E 4 and, or 1 and Lee 2 and 3 and Lee 4 and. So those are the 2 counts. I'm speaking out the triplets, but those are doubles. And I spoke out the 16th note triplet, so I could account for every single stroke I play. And what I would want to do is track the movement. So I have a couple of ways of speaking it out. I think the simpler way would just to say down and agree that that's a double stroke. And then you could say up, taking the word up, splitting it into 2 syllables to also give the meaning or the definition that that is 2 strokes with the same hand. And in between, I could just say double. I could say tap, but double, 2-syllable word will work nicely. So I could say down, up, double, down, tap, down, tap, down, tap, down, up, double, down, tap, down. So I diverted. I went back to actually number 1 on page 16. Let's go back to number 12. And when I play those eighth notes, those are always going to be met with a downstroke, and I'm going to fill in with a wristed tap stroke. So another little technical issue that you might find, which is challenging, is you're using 2 different delivery systems to the stick. If I played a string of eighth notes, and again, this is not for fast tempo, this is for slow and to help seed an identity of an elliptical lift and drop to conceptualize time and to help induce a better relationship of how time moves. I'm just going to play down, tap, down, tap, down, tap, down, tap. So this is doing a lift and a down on every quarter. And in between, I'm and. Okay. That covers 50% of the movement. If I say tap or whatever I'm going to use to describe that. Because as I'm playing this stroke here, I'm rebooting my lift to get my drop again. And as I'm playing this drop, I'm doing a counter turn to put my hand in a position to come here. So I want to try to bring about an equal level of movement with the hands. You could play a tippy-tappy stroke with the left hand and kind of keep it here, but that kind of has this right hand peaking and spiking and the left hand kind of low and flat. That's not going to be helpful for this exercise. There's other things that we could, get involved in that would, be using some of those sensibilities. So here I go. I'm just going to play a string of 8 notes again with my down, tap, and then I'll speak out what's not being played in terms of the impact of stick to pad. And I would have up, turn, up, turn. So right hand's coming up, left hand's turning up, turn, up, turn, up, turn, and back to the down, tap, down, tap. So now if I apply that again to number 12, and one of the reasons I put number 12 in there is because it rolls from the right side to the left side. So you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, left, and left, right. Right to left, left to right, which is a nice way to kind of, get your right hand and left hand getting equal time on the pad. The great things on these are the little 16-bar exercises at the end. There's a 16-bar solo, and that moves everything around. So you really got to take all the exploits and sit firmly in that and really watch how you're moving. No speed. Don't worry about playing fast. If you want to really build up a flow, you want to get access to all the movement of what you're doing from your shoulder down through your elbow to your wrist and inside your hand, and not get tight and restricted. Okay, time and space being relative, am I always going to move with large strokes? No, but those strokes and the lifts and the releases will be recognized at faster tempos. And if you've induced a good relationship with them, you'll see them. If I do rolls faster, and let's say I'm just going to do, for this example, I'll do a 13-stroke roll, and I'll play it starting from the pad, and I'll play the outline first. It will be tap, 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 up, tap, down. Tap, 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 up, tap, down. So I want to serve the roll with a punctuation mark at the end of it, and I would play tap, 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 up, tap, down. So that up to down is like the punctuation mark to end the roll. It could be an exclamation point, therefore it would be an accent when I hit that last note, or it could be just a period, just finalizing the end of the roll. But the upstroke to downstroke is what I'm really trying to share with you, that exists inside my anatomy. There's no tightness. There's no restriction to that. And so when you work on these things loose, you start to get a nicer flow. And it's not easy to play slow and get everything to work naturally, as if somebody had a marionette string on you and was just pulling your wrist up, and all those hinges were breaking naturally. Couple that with how the stick sits in the hand and the natural, elements of physics of getting a follow through, and now you're talking. Those things are hard to put in a book. So that's what I do as an educator. I really microscope a lot of details, and then, set it into the format of things like this. Or once I would have this done, like for these roll studies, I would go into a couple of different method books or snare drum books that I like to use. One is a sort of a little known book to many people. To me, it's a big book in terms of like how I use it. And it's called The Contemporary Percussionist by Charles Memphis. I think it's got a little more traction since I've been using it, because I've talked to certain students and they'll try to get it like at the professional drum shop here in Hollywood, and they'll go, "Oh, it's sold out." That's probably because all my students are going to buy it there. I always say that's where it's published. You might as well go direct to the source instead of going to somewhere else. All right, so let's just take a quick look at another thing that I would do with the doubles. I would also superimpose them over 16th notes. So that's going to have a different spin with that double stroke. Now, go back and remember what I said. So you have the wristed double stroke or a tap stroke where you're just dropping and catching, or you have one where you're kind of resetting. I have an exercise that I would do that would be a bounce to a turn. One, to recognize the full range and motion of your wrist turn. You're never going to turn that wide of a turn when you're playing double strokes. but to remind yourself of the backstroke element to the double stroke. It's not necessary to snap the double into the hand so much as to just draw it into the hand as you're making a counter turn to reset up your position to play the next double, a la wristed doubles. So when I play this next version, I'll just play some 16th notes to outline my movement first, and then I will play the double. So I would have down, tap, up, tap, down, tap, up, tap, down, tap, up, tap, down, tap, up, tap. Right hand's playing molar eighth notes, down and up and down and up. Want to be super mindful of where I am when I'm coming up on the sweet spot of the stick tip. Don't over-release the stick and feel that nice solid impact. That impact can get and draw a nice full tone out of the pad or the drum based on the timing element of when you're lifting and how you're lifting. So not what you do, how you do what you do. You lift, but you don't want to lift and get and bypass the sweet spot of the stick tip and get yourself over the tip of the tip. That's going to get a wispy tone or slide off the pad. I want to be right there to lift up and be right on top of that upstroke. So if I play my down tap, up tap outline for 16th notes, and then I convert them to doubles, not easy to say this. I'll play it a little slower, but I'd have pivot catch, drop pull. That's the easy part. Notice my upstroke double is seated in a low position. And yes, I do have a subtle anticipation to set up the pull on the upstroke. That would be induced by a little bit of a drop and a pull. It's also basically the same mechanics when you do streamline of those that you would call the push-pull. You let the trap door in the back open so you have a little space to pull it back in as you lift up. So you want to be mindful that you don't lift and then drop and pull and get this wide turn. That's not being super efficient in your space value. So I would have my down tap, up tap, down tap, up tap, convert it to the doubles. Pivot catch double, drop pull double, pivot catch double, drop pull double. And my doubles here would be this bounce and catch and draw back with my wrist. Slow, it's really challenging to get everything to move nice and full. But again, that's part of the game. And if I couple it with eighth notes, this would be on page 22 in the Ted Reed Syncopation book. We'll just do number 1 to make it easy. And I would have, down, tap, up, tap, and down, tap, and 4, and 1, E, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. Feel that lift and drop. Carve out the space of time by choreographing it. When you have a really well-stated choreographed move, it's going to make more sense for time and how it works. So that's the earlier part of the book. And I spent a fair amount of time just breaking down things for example, on page 24 and 25, where there are figures of either 2 16th notes in an eighth note or an eighth note and 2 16th notes to set up the 5-stroke rules. So if you're playing 2 16ths in an ace, like 1 E and, 2 E and, 3 E and, 4 E and. If I'm not mistaken, on page 25, that would be number 12. You could play that one and that would have a little bit of a different movement. That's the one anomaly out of all my rules where we don't end on the single stroke with a downstroke. So my breakdown for that without the roll, with playing 1 E and, 2 E and, would be down, up, tap, and down, up, tap, down, up, tap, down, up, tap, and 1 E and, 2 E and, 3 E and, 4 E and. But every other roll that I would do with a 7, 9, 11, 13, whatever, would have some kind of a downstroke at the end of the roll to punctuate it. And the other 5-stroke roll with the 8th note, 2 16th notes would fall into that same category because it would be down, up, tap, down, up, tap, down, up, tap, down, up, tap, down. So you can really exploit the open value of that and not get sticky with your doubles and start to feel like they are stretchy elastic bands and allow them to open. Now, that's not to say that you can't restrict the movement of the stick inside the hand and keep it in more of a position where it's barely leaving the outer corner of the palm. It's not what I want to do, though, because I have other exercises that would detail that. And there's a lot of different things to kind of circulate around so that your hand builds up a character of what I call the inner logic of movement. So all those things kind of come together as I'm building, whether it's in French or German, and those converge to set up a position where you're kind of in between. Path of least resistance would lead me to a floor tom going into French grip. If I don't have a good understanding of how to keep my fingers reflexively open and follow the bouncing stick, and I'm cradling it, that's going to be kind of choking the sound of the stick. And I'm not saying you can't do that, but try to go for a little bit of a higher road. And then again, if it's a posture, gesture, vibe, attitude, expression, you can always break those rules. But that nice bounce and lift in French grip is super valuable. So let me go to another place in my book. I've got this section that, to me, I never even looked at it. And it's resting in, I don't know. I don't have my TED Read here. Do I somewhere? Maybe. I got to look at TED Read just to see where those pages are. And here we go. As a guy who's teaching daily, all my books are kind of ripped up, and I have about 7 books or 8 books piled on the floor here that I use fairly regularly. But so going back to, in TED Read Syncopation, he calls this lesson 3, accented 8th note triplets. Well, I started to apply that to moving around the toms because I was looking for a specific kind of a move. And there is a version that you could use, the syncopated values on page 34 through 45, which I do go back and use, but you could also detail it so nobody has to conceptualize and it's right in front of your face. So if I was to open up TED Read to page 56, and in my book, where do I break that down? I think it's page something 45 or 44. Let me see real quick because I don't have all my pages. No, I'm sorry. I set up the idea on page 38. It's called choreographing your moves. And then when I go to page 40, I actually take some exercises that I've given examples for, and I used page 56 in TED Read, number 37, and number 38. And this book actually also comes with access to videos. And my videos are not just performance. My videos are also like mini lessons where I'm talking it through. So I'm not just performing the exercise. I'm probably talking about a few things to set up a little more detail to what it really is or what we're looking to do. So what I had done here is I took number 37, and let me just break that down in 8th note triplets. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So those accents are 1 and of the triplets on beat 1, the of 2 to beat 3 in accent, and beat 4. And inside that, I'd have a very, very definitive choreographed move. If I was just doing it on the pad, and I'll start in German, I would have what I would call a bounce to a close. I would let my strike from a molar delivery system bounce, and I'd come right back into my hand and close. Super efficient. Okay, not easy to do. It looks easy. I'll tell you, one of my favorite Freddy comments to me that he said many times through the years, because we did, I don't know, did I do 5 or 6 clinics with Freddy? Something like that, because he would get performance anxiety. He certainly wouldn't say that, but he would bring me to hold his hand and be there as the guy that could demonstrate stuff. And my look back to that is I was really uncomfortable in that environment because I didn't have what I thought I wanted to really deliver. I did, but, in a performance like that, bro, sit down and play. It was like, But he would say to me time and time again, Bruce, when they ask you how you do that, tell them easily. So all these bounces and stuff like that and the maneuvering, was something that I worked hard on when I was 19, 20. I used to do TED Read Syncopation, and he'd bring some guys in. And he'd go, Bruce, play for him. And I'd, freeze. He'd go, no, play that exercise. So I was doing TED Read, and he'd have me stop. And he'd just look at my position. And it was spot on. Doesn't mean you got good musicianship, right? Good technique is good technique. I had to take all that stuff, and I had to learn how to access that and put that into a deeper format of developing my musicianship. So, but at the end of the day, I can tell you, with all the many hundreds or thousands of students that I've taught, everybody has a common theme. Man, my hands are tight, or I feel tight in my arm. I feel like I bumped into a wall. That's a common theme. So our instrument is so heavily reliant upon good technical facility so that you don't have an expiration date standing in front of you of August 19th, 2023. We want to push that up so you're playing for a long, long time. You know, look at Roy Haynes. Okay, who knows what he was really doing technically, but he looked loose and he always had a great attitude and vibe and characteristic. And I don't know how he's doing on this particular day, but I've seen him playing in his 90s. I see Bernard Purdy kicking it down in his 80s. You know, that's what I want to do when I grow up, be able to continue to play. So back to the top. Let's take a look at that. So if I just detail every move on that one, I have bounce, tap, close, up, down, up, tap, bounce, tap, close, up, down, up, tap, down. I could do it in French. Now, instead of saying close, because my fingers aren't going to close, they're going to stay open and supportive of the stick in that position. I could say bounce, tap, catch, up, down, up, tap, bounce, tap, catch, up, down, up, tap, down. And I want to get those nice lifts and drops. Every upstroke is preceded by, every downstroke is preceded by an upstroke. And if your upstroke sucks, your downstroke's going to suck. If you have a nice delivery, not out of breath, not rushed, but nice and easy, you're going to be able to get a nice fluid downstroke, and that's going to be a huge value to construct how you get through some of these things. So taking that notion of the eighth note triplets, what I wanted to do was set up a movement around the toms. It's nothing new. It's not anything that I invented, but what I wanted to do is take the eighth note triplet, reinterpret it as quarter note triplets so that your movement would be now reduced to a slower rate of movement by virtue of the rhythmic value. And then go to the eighth note triplet value. So you're doubling up the movement, and all of a sudden you're accessing a little bit more fluidity, provided you've been working on the slow. So if I was going in quarter note triplets, let's say my tempo is 1, 2, 3, 4. Da do boo ba da 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 da. Everything's now been reduced. I want to live inside every nuance of those arcs so that I feel and can exploit the lift. You can do it other ways. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. You could just forearm it and you could kind of just, do whatever. But at the end of the day, when you get that lift and drop and you're able to really maneuver around, if you see finesse players like a Dave Weckl, let's just say at the top of the finesse category and fluidity, other guys in there, but he stands out as a great example because visually when you see him play, he dances. His level of movement has been truly addressed in the utmost in, I don't want to say perfection, but certainly pretty close. And not that that's the end all, but that is certainly going to open up channels or open up doors to access larger rates of musicianship that you're looking to develop. If you got, some different ways to move and you can access that, you're certainly going to get more bang for your buck. I'll actually talk about that in a second. I'll go one more section with this. So if we go in my book and just kind of creep up to pages 44 and 45, what I did was take this section in Ted Reed that he has dotted 8th, 16th notes. And I started to look at that and I went, oh, that's kind of cool because they're, the same idea of the swinging value of like, if you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, well, it's not that, it's a 16th note. But I thought, geez, what if I just put a diddle in the middle and I make them all inverted paradiddles? That also opens up the opportunity to stay in line with what I did with my eighth note triplets. So in other words, my eighth note triplets with alternating strokes would be 1 and Lee, 2 and Lee, 3 and Lee, 4 and Lee. So any accents that fall on 1 and a would be right hand. Any accents that fall on 2 and a would be left hand. 3 and a, right hand. 4 and a. Okay, well, not always going to have all those accents, but that's the layout. If I do that with an inverted paradiddle, I have the same components. I have 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, and 4 E and a. 1 and a, 3 and a, right hand, 2 and a, 4 in a left hand. So if I take the interpretation of what I did with the exercise number 37, page 56, Ted Reed Syncopation, and I actually charted this out in my book where I took the quarter note triplet rhythm, the eighth note triplet rhythm, and then put it with the inverted paradiddle. I'll take that same accent structure, but now I'll do it with an inverted paradiddle. So let's go back. Our accent structure was 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, and I put it into an inverted paradiddle. Now you got 3 gears: quarter note triplet, eighth note triplet, and the 16th note with the inverted paradiddle interpretation. Really great way to start working through. Now you have a template. I only did at that section, including the inverted paradiddle, on page 46 in my book, I did 2 examples. And I went back and looked at now the way you could interpret those in the earlier section of the book, which would be page 34, number 1. But it's the same as page 56, number 37. It's just 37 has all the eighth note triplets. 34 has that syncopated eighth note, quarter note, eighth note, quarter note, which is 1, 3, 4. If you're interpreting it as a jazz eighth note, if you're just playing it straight, it'll be 1 and 3, 4. But every time I had gone through that book with anybody, it was always interpreted as swinging those because you played those as left-hand figures against the jazz ride cymbal pattern. So anyway, that's a great way of working on phrasing. You can take the template of that and take any accent structure in that layout, going either to page 56, page 57. There's a couple on there that you may not use. You could. They have some inner or middle beats of triplets in there. I'm really addressing the first and third partial of the triplet. And in my 16th note version, the first and fourth partial of that for my accents. Play that to the toms, play it to the cymbals. The way I break it down, I've got playing the exercise on the snare drum. So let me just go, though, to something I wanted to address a few moments ago, talking about what I'd spoken in the roll studies. Delivering different technical approaches is really kind of one of my games, and getting into that French grip position of a French grip molar or a German grip molar, or how can I use that push-pull, which is sort of a, end of the line of molar. It's a little bit different because you're not using your whole forearm to locomote the stick. It's now just inside the hand and you're giving a push to a pull. You could reverse it and do a pull-push, right? That would be like, 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and a 4. So all my eighth notes are pulled as opposed to my eighth notes being pushed in that first and foremost formula of a push-pull, which is probably something a lot of people use. I had a student who was a Freddy Gruber guy years ago in the 70s, has a fairly well-known band, and they're still cooking out there. It's the band Ambrosia. And Burley studied with me over the course of about a year in 2017. And I'd known him a little bit from Freddie and back in the day when I was a student. And of course, to me, he was a big star and I loved Ambrosia. He took some lessons with me, and I had asked him about one of his songs that was a big hit for Ambrosia, which is called You're the Biggest Part of Me. And that's a 16th note groove. It's like, and I asked him, I said, hey, man, did you use the system? That's what Freddie called the push-pull. He said, oh, yeah. Because Freddie was all about that. And I was just working on it and playing that groove all the time. And I was like, yeah, okay. Didn't know because, he could have done a molar thing. So now you have choices. My point is you have choices. You can dialectically go in and get some nuance into your playing. Molar, for me, if I'm looking at like the German molar and playing a 16th note one-handed pattern, I would look at James Gadsden and how he played that. He was grooving with that, man, sitting in the back of the hand and just motoring along with all those great Bill Withers tunes. You look at like maybe a guy like Clyde Stubblefield, like in the early days, those guys were a little bit more on the tip and they did sit in the French grip position. Now, did they have all the nuances that I would bring forward? No, but I don't care about that. I'm listening to what they're doing and then adapting to what I think a flowing use of the anatomy, how that would support the movement to the stick. So you can get, like I said, into nuance, and music will bring about what are the qualities I need to put in here. It's usually going to yell at you like, you need to do this. As a longtime co-leader with my brother of the David Becker Tribune, he'd give me material, and sometimes, 3 drummers would pop into my head of like how I wanted this to sound, and then I'd try it with different approaches, usually probably editing a lot of the stuff out that I was wanting to play, thinking more drumistically, and then going, oh, this is going to be more functional and I need to do this. And it was a good thing because I didn't have anybody producing all the time. It was me and David. And a lot of times I was in charge of what I did as a drummer. So we were very fortunate to, embark upon this creative path, and 10 CDs over 35 years and a lot of travel and a lot of playing with some nice heavyweights was awesome. Awesome. Did a lot of stuff. But now I'm not doing that. I'm sitting here and I'm more into the education mode, just as a point of I'd run those 2 lanes for many years. It was time to kind of step over to this lane and pass on all the goods that I had been working with for many years. So that being said, I wanted to ask Gilbert to jump back in here. Are there any questions, or Gilbert, did I provoke any questions with you? Now you got to unmute yourself. You're muted.
I'm sorry, I was trying to make sure I wouldn't cause any sounds. On your open close technique, could you go in depth a little bit on that?
Sure. Here's what I would say. Okay, so just a little bit before I would do anything, there would be a setup of the hand. So inner workings of the hand are truly important. That's a long, extended conversation, so I don't want to get too detailed there.
Yeah.
But suffice it to say that if I have my stick nicely well seated in my hand, I'll just point out a few characteristics that if you look, my thumb and index finger would be essentially in the same position that they'd be in French grip. The stick sits in the last joint of the index finger. That's home base. You can move it out, but if you want to do a successful push-pull and you're here, your stick is not going to catch good traction with your fingers when it's here. It's going to catch better traction when it sits on the last joint of the index finger. So again, thumb. Okay, now there's an element of thumb that I want to be able to draw into, some pressure back here, some pressure points to add to. It's not going to really play too much in the push-pull, a little bit, because when I extend and push, that is going to draw in. And I want also to get what I call a sticky value to that. So the stick sits nicely with the fingers. But if I start out, again, and the hand is already assembled, I would start with just a simple shuffle, because what I want to do is induce the relationship of this hinge. We have 3 delivery systems, essentially. From the shoulder down, I can get what I would call a kick up in the molar delivery system. And that stick kicks my fingers open. If you notice, my fingers are not weak and tumbling off the stick or blowing off like dust. They're grabbing and solid with that. And there's a lot of pressure point in there. I want that strength inside my hand. I also want it to be able to loosen up. But the variable of tension and release needs to be actualized. If I do that in a wristed position, I can do the same element of response. In other words, thrust forward, I get that stick in the same position from my wrist. So there's my second delivery. Let's go to the third from the forearm. I just push the forearm down. I don't want to extend too much wrist and molar activity in there. So again, the compartmentalization game is truly of importance so that you don't move out of characteristic and get in the way of yourself. Again, people might go, it's too much to think about. It all comes together if you do the exercises. I give you tasks and you do them.
Yeah.
You can think of like the wax on, wax off, paint the fence with the vertical stroke, and then down, all that stuff, and just do it, being mindful of the task and not thinking too much outside of that. So if I do my shuffle, my push to pull, I would start with a push on the of 4, and I would pull on my quarter notes or on my numbers. And actually, honestly, the way I would write that out, I write it out in a simpler way, just because I write it out with an 8th note triplet leading into it, and then 8th note triplet, rest, 8th note triplet. So I hope everybody reads. But so I've got the middle beat of the triplet missing. But a better way to write it out would be putting quarter note triplets on the 1 value or the quarter note value, because this takes up the value of a quarter note triplet. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. And if I spike it into my hand, I don't know if you can hear that, but it shortens the tone. I want to extend the tone. Okay, so when I'm doing this push to pull, it's all from the forearm. I don't want my wrist to get involved in release. I don't want my wrist to turn back. And I want my stick to stay in line with my forearm. I want my fingers to extend naturally. And I don't want to over snap the stick when I pull it back into the hand. I want to use a little bit of the value of weight to draw my fingers to a close, and the timing value of how I come off the pad. So what I don't want to do is close in and then lift as an afterthought. I want to come off the pad. And if I was just to say like a little conceptual idea, think about having a suction cup on the stick tip and feel how it pops right off. You get a nice fat tone. It's just a regular gum rubber old real feel pad. Well, I can get a fat tone out of that pull. And so when you're doing these, you know, the wrist is bouncing around now, but I'm not doing this. None of that. It's the fingers spreading and opening and pushing, and I'm pulling. Even when I'm playing faster, at the end of a pull stroke, if I stop 1 E and 2 E, I would give. It's like taking a fastball into the catcher's mitt. You don't hold your hand here and just take it.
Yeah.
You're going to get a nice burn in your palm. You're going to give with it. So we want to build up some gives with what we do with the stick, whether it's a molar strike, how you suck the stick in. You know, a lot of guys, when I'm working on that stuff, they have an instability of their forearm. They'll jump back. Oh, that's just because they don't want to take all the shock into their hand. But that kind of spikes the stick in a funny way, and you don't get a full fat tone dropping to your threshold. And so dropping to a certain threshold will produce a bottom to the stroke. If I jump back, it's kind of like it's shortened. It's not a full drop. So
in the I guess in the public school teaching in the rudimental we call, you know, you get a top hit sound where you just hear the top part of the drum, or you get the whole body of the drum when you project.
If you hit the drum really hard, you're going to shock the shell. It's not going to get a chance to reverberate. So you can, like any percussion instrument, if you play concert bass drum, it's boom. You play timpani, it's these trampoline bounces. When I was a student of Karen Irvin, she was like, bounce that mallet like a trampoline, you know, like sit with it and bounce. If you hit into a timpani, you hit into a bass drum. Okay. The snare drum, we've been conditioned to watch rock and roll drummers and stuff, and bap. Okay. That does not produce a greater tone. There are guys who can pull it off. Like there's some guys who are heavy hitting guys, and that's, you know, they've got a quality. I don't know exactly what they're doing because I'm not analyzing everybody. My eyes are fixated on my students. But, you know, I've had some heavy hitters. Mark Shulman, Tristan Bowden. I don't think there's much more heavy hitting than that. Glenn Sobel. Glenn studied with me when he was a kid for a couple of years. He was, you know, a very poised, talented, and intense young man when he was studying with me. And look at him now. He's the same. That's how Glenn was when he was a kid. That intense, passionate. He's a little quieter now, you know, because he was a kid. But he's out there killing it with Alice Cooper and the Hollywood Vampires and, you know.
Johnny Depp.
Yeah. So those kinds of things, when you overstrike and stimulate the drum, it's not really good. Certainly not good for your anatomy. So, you know, you can go, oh, man, that's cool. I saw a post by a guy, and I can't remember his name because I don't really know him, but he's on my Facebook friend list, you know. So he's a German drummer, I believe. And he said, after, you know, 45 years of playing and blah, 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 I'm going to retire. You know, I'm having too many aches and pains.
Yeah.
I'm not a doctor, but I've had a lot of guys who've had aches and pains, and I've been able to maneuver them around that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I don't make false promises. I just say, well, let's do some sensible things and see how that affects what you're doing. And so my detail of the extended value of the intricacy of the hand is, you know, pretty detailed now. And I have a lot of things that can be for any level of player. It's great if you get it done earlier because you're going to have a better starting point.
Yeah.
Like for me, I was 19. So to me, it was like, oh, yeah, why would I do that? And even when I try to do that where I'm hitting in, my body rebels because if I hit that in a way where it doesn't feel right and it's uncomfortable, my body goes, no, big red X. Can't do that.
Yeah. I do notice in your teaching and in your playing, there's a lot of the elements make for longevity, you know, health and longevity in your hands and in your body. And I really, really like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, again, that's, the instrument is such a physical instrument, and theater included too. I have a lot of stuff. I mean, I've really actually worked with JoJo a little bit on his foot
Oh,
back in the day, because Freddie had given him a lesson, and it was a Freddie lesson. So it was very unclear. And he would call me endlessly and ask me like, it's not working. And at one point I was able to get out to New York and hang with him. I think we hung a few times out there in the past, and he was very gracious. He loaned me his drum kit when I was playing at the 55 bar.
oh wow.
And he wasn't in town, but his girlfriend at the time gave me the key to his studio, and I used his drums. But anyway, we sat for, I don't know, it seemed like it was like 3 hours, just fixated. And I was going through all the things at that time of how I would have narrated bass drum stuff. In fact, it's gotten more detailed. And when I saw him like a few years later at a clinic in West LA Music, now it's defunct. It was a nice store out in West LA. I remember JoJo going like, yeah, man, he said an expletive I will not say, but he said, Freddie, you help me out with that. So David Garibaldi's foot looks fantastic, going through some of the same things. Many guys, Mark Schulman, Mark Schulman was getting off the head now, instead of hitting in with what I call a thrusted forward or a hyperextended ankle. You're not going to go that far with your foot. Try doing that night after night and clobbering that head. Not going to work. So in the same sense of how your hands can have lifts and drops and mobility and different little approaches to access some dialectical things, I do the same thing with that too.
Yes.
Got a lot of food for thought in that area.
Yes. Man, I could listen to you and hear your teachings for days. It's insightful. I always learn something new, not one thing, multiple things every time I see or hear your playing. In regards to Freddie,
Mhm.
wh- who, if you know, who did he learn his stuff from? Who did he study with?
Those are kind of vagaries, but my assessments are, I know that he was a student of Jimmy Chapin's, because Jimmy would yell to me about that. So I hung fairly closely with Jimmy too. And especially when I was living in Europe, because Jimmy did a lot of traveling. He did a lot of
Yeah.
workshops over there. And so I saw him quite regularly and hung. And he would give me his insights to his thing and watch what I was doing. And we would have conversations about it. And a lot of times I'd hang with the two of them, Freddie and Jimmy. And sometimes they could act like old buddies, not as often. And sometimes they could be somewhat kind of bitchy and adversarial. I had to sometimes,
Separate them.
Jimmy would come to me and he'd go like, what's up with Freddie? He'd start yelling at me about it like I was Freddie's keeper. And then Freddie, I'll do my best Freddie, would come at me and go, Jesus, Bruce, what's going on with Jimmy, man? He's losing his mind, And so anyway, with Freddie, knowing from Jimmy that he studied with him, I knew that. I also knew there was, I can't remember the guy's name, Bobby. He wrote a cool book about being the drummer in Vegas. I can't think of his last name. He was a student of Henry Adler's, and he said, I was studying at that time with when Freddie was there as a student. So, and I know Freddie had a relationship with Henry. And so Henry, Freddie used to talk about Morris Goldenberg, who was an educator out there, I guess a classical guy, a legit guy.
Yes. He has a book out.
Yeah, so
Widely used.
Freddie was also a good observationalist. So, and hanging with Buddy, I don't know, the timbre of the conversations with Buddy and Freddie. I'm not sure if Buddy was so clean and articulate about how he would emphasize what he was doing, but maybe enough for Freddie to see, because I would say one of the things that I had as a kid that I really picked up on and that he nurtured even more out of me was the observation skills. So I can watch any of my students, and I do this on Zoom. People go like, does the Zoom thing work? I'll go, yes. And I've been doing it for about 10 years now. My observation skills are spot on. I can see every nuance of movement. I can tell if you're not, if there's a little resistance in your elbow, if you're not lifting, whatever the point of reference is that I'm trying to work on. So I think Freddie had keen observation skills for that. And he watched, he was a street kid in New York. So, but I think, some of the educational ideas, he also used to talk about, oh man, what's that guy's name? Oh, just blew out of my head. There was a guy also in New York, and the guy wrote, oh, hang on. He wrote that book with Jack DeJohnette. That's right. What's his name? Where's my DeJohnette book? Come on, man. I can't think of the guy's name. Charlie Perry. Freddie used to talk about Charlie Perry. And he said something like I sat with Charlie and we like wrote out the whole thing, man, before he moved to LA or something like that. And, you know, Freddie's early teaching was like just chocolate mess of like, you know, he probably did some things. Where he really started to probably formulate that was at the place that I taught. I didn't realize that Freddie taught there. I kind of did, but I didn't think about it until later. That was my starting point, sort of. I had taught before. I had, you know, kids in the neighborhood or different kids or people knew me. And for some reason, parents had a trusting attitude of me. I mean, I had that vibe when I was a kid. I was kind of serious too. Oh, can you teach my kids? So I had a few students when I was a kid.
Oh,
but
wow.
82, Mark Shulman passed me the proverbial drumstick baton and said, dude, you want to teach here? And that was our local store. So I taught there for a couple years. That's where I had Glenn. And Freddie started there around 66 or 67. The store, when it was first opened, was Mel Zelnick and Terry Gibbs, the music stop. Terry had sold out, and Mel just took over. And the thing about Mel was that he didn't like Freddie because Freddie was always pulling shtick on him at the store. But he did have respect for Freddie because he would say, Bruce, you really want to get your chops together, you go to Freddy Gruber. He had one of those rough, deep, resonant bass voices, smoking those Vantage cigarettes. And that guy was a cool cat. He came out working like some NBC orchestra stuff. He played with the Benny Goodman Sextet. So Mel had a little bit of a career, and then he kind of got into the retail thing and pushed that along. And he was there for a number of years until he retired and went to like Prescott, Arizona.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
But I would say for sure Henry Adler and Jimmy Chapin, and somebody, I think it was Dom, said that he'd also hung with Joe Morello. So, you know, I think Freddie hung and he observed and he copped and then he brought it over and he was in the lab working it out. He had a lot of great students.
You know? Yes. And now that you mention it, I see some similarities between you and him. You mentioned how you were able to get his concepts and compartmentalize them, like you would put them in their place, right? So you could reference for them later, and you have such a unique way of to me, in my opinion, you're in the top two maybe that can talk about Freddie and give you like a deep insight of what he's saying.
Oh, we had long hangs. There was some joyful, fun, silly hangs, and then there were some agonizing hangs where I had to read the right act. Well, like for example, we were driving once from Wiesbaden, Germany, and going to hang with this piano player that had moved from the States to The Hague in the Netherlands. And I'd only been living there for a year and a half. And when I was driving back, there's a split off where you go either to Antwerp, where I lived in Belgium, or you cut up and you go towards Rotterdam and The Hague. And I was just kind of like, it was a long drive because it's about a 4-hour drive to Antwerp. So we were probably, 3 hours into it. And I missed the cutoff. And I'm like, oh, shit. And Freddie starts freaking out. He's like, now we're never going to get the Irvs, man. He's got to go to bed early, like Irv, like he's looking after him, like he's his father or something like that. So I kind of meander around and I'm trying to figure it out. And it's not easy. You don't have a GPS. This is the 90s, man. And I get off and I'm going, okay, if I cut through this little town here, I could probably get myself right back on the whatever it is, highway and get back up there. And Freddie's like badgering me. This don't look right, Bruce. I think you fucked up, man. And he's like, yelling at me and blah, 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 blah. And I just stopped my car and I go, Freddie, you want to drive? And, I just stopped the car. You want to drive? And goes, shut up. And then the ticker. I'm driving and we hit like a road closure. Nobody knows there's a road closure. And then he starts going, I told you. Like, oh, man, I'm going to toss him out of my car. We made
Yeah.
it. Irv's okay. It was late. Irv was a musician. Irv was, like roughly Freddie's age. He was a guy that moved over in the 70s to the Netherlands, and he played with all the greats. He played with Dexter Gordon and Ben Webster, and he knew Chet Baker, and he was friends with Bill Evans, and he was a nutty guy, character as well. But it was all, good stuff. There was many, many funny events that I went through with Freddie. I should write a book because I do have a lot of stories about him.
Yes, you should.
Entertaining. And I have a friend who's like another guy that he doesn't play drums so much now. He's more playing guitar, and he's got a different career path now. But he was on that innermost circle of Freddie's. And I knew him when he was really young, and we kind of hang, and I mentored him. He studied with me quite a bit in his earlier years. And he came out to my house about, I don't know, 4 or 6 weeks ago or whatever. He was getting his car serviced. He goes, hey, man, I got time to hang. I thought we were just going to hang for maybe about an hour. We ended up hanging, I think, almost 3 hours, and we were just going through funny stories of Freddie.
Yeah.
Because he had gone to Europe with Freddie. Freddie needed somebody to hold his hand on the flight, and then he showed up and hung with me. And that time, the first visit, he fell down my flight of stairs and dislocated his shoulder. He was cranky the whole week. He was struggling with, I think, the cultural divide, because it was much different back then.
Yes.
And he'd never traveled like that. And he was bitching about stuff. And at the middle of the night, we were like hanging out in my apartment. We were listening to Bill Evans. It was a really cool hang because it got him calm after like 8 days of him being agitated. And I said, Freddie, when you go to the bathroom, hit the slide on this side of the wall. It's a timed light. It's one of those, like little lighted ones, and you push it and it goes, and after 2 minutes, it shuts off. Well, when Freddie would go into the bathroom, it was like, a 30-minute affair. It was like my grandfather, like, maybe snipping some hair, pulling some hair off his ears, looking and washing, whatever the hell. He gets out. He can't find the light by the bathroom door switch, and he just takes a step, and then a second step, and then the third step, you're falling down a flight of stairs. And so I'm sleeping, and I was sharing a room with my brother at that time, and I just hear this like boom, 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 boom. And I went, whoa, what was that? And then immediately, all you heard was like, Jesus Christ, God damn it, all the cursing and all this stuff, this like low key. And we jumped up and hit the lights on, and he's at the bottom of the stairs. And thankfully, because he could have broken his neck, he could have done all he did was dislocate his shoulder.
Oh, wow.
So at the rest of his trip that he had planned was kind of blown off. So I had to house him for another like 8 days.
Yeah.
And he had a sling on, and my brother drove with him in the ambulance, and he was freaking out, squeezing my brother's hands. I don't want to die. I didn't have the heart to tell him this later, but I found out the hospital they brought him to, because I lived there for 4 years. Later on, that was not the hospital to go to. It had kind of a crappy reputation. But so all the while, for like that 8 days, I had to look after him. We went to the North Sea Jazz Festival, and he had a sling on. I had to always tie his sling on, and I had to take it off for him when he could go into the shower. And I think the second day he had that sling on, he said, telling my brother, David, take that sling, put a drumstick in my hand. And he's sitting at my drum, and he wants to play it. And I walk in, and of course, I feel like I'm the dad now to this guy. And I look at him with the stick in his hand. I go, what the hell are you doing? Take that stick. What are you and he looked at me like a kid in a candy store.
That's
so our relationship was like, multidimensional.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful, man. And the way that you can bring it across is so crystal clear and in depth.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Gil. Yeah.
Bruce, thank you so much for sharing with us. It's a truly an honor to be able to learn from you, and the depth of your information is top notch and easy to understand. Really appreciate it. you pretty much answered questions I had, from Freddie, and that push pull technique. And I saw some of the comments from some of the viewers. We had people from different parts of the world watching. So thank
Nice.
you.
Nice.
Thank you so much, Bruce. This is your house. Whenever you have anything that you want to share, you're welcome here 24/7,
Right on, man.
anytime. If you want to do any projects, we're down. Just tell us what, and we'll take care of it, man.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
How can people reach you, Bruce? Because I know you teach,
Yeah.
you teach virtually, and your books. How can we get them?
So I'm available, brucebecker.com. In fact, my website is just being refaced right now. My good friend and student Jeffrey, or former student Jeffrey, is refacing the website, giving it a little bit of an update, got some newer photos. My latest book, The Ultimate Guide in Syncopation, is available through Hudson. You can go to Amazon, but I think it's better to go through Hudson. There are 35 accompanying videos, and at the inner first page, you have a code to access those videos. I also have a previous book called Puzzles, Rhymes, and Riddles. That's also available through Hudson, but only in the digital download format. If you want a hard copy, I have the hard copies. That's also available on my website. And going way back to my very first educational venture, in terms of a format, I have an old DVD called Concepts and Philosophies, and that is also available in a digital download format from Hudson Music. So 3 products all available through Hudson. If you go to my webpage, there's a section for lessons. Just email me and I will get back to you. Just make your consideration that I'm in the Pacific time zone so that you know what your schedule, how that relates to mine. I have guys in Australia, not Singapore, I'm sorry, Taiwan, India, New Zealand, where else? A lot of guys in Western Europe. So I've got some guys in the UK. I've got some guys in Germany, Belgium, Switzerland. I got a new guy that's going to start. I think he's in, is it Sweden, I believe? He'll start this week. A lot of guys in Canada and a lot of guys all through the States. So, just hit me up. My schedule is, somewhat intact, but it always percolates. It always moves just by virtue of the amount of people that I carry. So hit me up, have some flexibility, a little patience, and I'll try to get you in. And if you want really solid details, this is the place to come. I have a
Yes.
really comprehensive building block program to enhance your technique and get to more pertinent conversation. I don't want to worry about playing, septuplets over quintuplets. I want to worry about, as Joe Picard would have said, learn to play your triplets and your 16th notes and you'll work.
Exactly, exactly. Well, Bruce, thank you so much. Again, truly an honor to have you here. And folks, it's always great to hang out with you. And we have some more of these coming up. So stay tuned. Make sure you follow us, follow our pages, and share, please. And you're welcome to peruse in the many clinics with world-class educators and performers like
That's right.
Bruce that you will find in our in our catalog. Um, Thank you so much, Bruce.
All right. Thank
We'll
you, sir.
see you soon. Take care.
Peace.